morning of July 14th, 2021. I'm sitting in a dark room, 4,866 miles from my home, filled with people I do not know, from countries spanning all across the globe. Our collective hushed breaths silenced as I am transfixed in the vastness of the film. The sound of rain and the forest quietly trickle through this massive, newly built auditorium as the dim lights come back on. While other viewers shuffle their way out, I'm left sitting back as if my matter was transmuted, the material now baked into my brain tissue. Both the immediacy and the grandness of the film overwhelm, and while trying to work through this dense, layered piece, what I came away with was a story that questions and explores the very idea of existence and reckons with our past and the land it took place on. At its root are Jessica and, of course, the sound. Before we dive in, though, some table setting may be good. As many will know, this film was directed by Thai filmmaker Apichatpong Weerasethakul, who has graciously bestowed us the right to call him Joe, and he's perhaps most well known for his Palme d'Or winning film Uncle Boonmee, Who Can Recall Past Lives, along with other acclaimed works like Syndromes in a Century, or my other personal favorite, Tropical Malady. He's had a fairly critically praised career, having won prizes at Cannes for all the films I just mentioned, and Joe sort of operates within the slow cinema movement, alongside filmmakers like Tsai Ming Liang, Chantal Akerman, Bela Tarr. The list goes on, and is filled with some of the world's greatest filmmakers. But anyone familiar with his work will understand he certainly has a signature style. His films occupy the space between observable reality and magical reverie. The unofficial term I've dubbed a sort of realist mysticism permeates his work, and many of his films carry metaphysical, environmental, and spiritual themes. He often plays with dualities, and in turn, his structures are often of two halves. Consider Tropical Malady, whose sweaty, emotional, industrial first half gives way to the spiritual, ethereal tiger hunt in the shadows of the forest. Memoria marks his first film in the English language, along with Spanish, of course, and the film was a co-production between Thailand and Colombia. It's been documented that Joe got inspiration for the film due to a rare, unexplained medical condition known as exploding head syndrome. It's common for the condition to wake people up from their sleep. It's categorized as a sort of parasomnia, and Joe has mentioned that he suffers from the condition most commonly when traveling. Of course, we can see how this is directly represented in the film. As we just mentioned, this is Joe's first film shot outside of Thailand, and his first not in his native language. Similarly for Tilda, though a bit of a linguistic wizard, Spanish is certainly not her first language, and her character Jessica is Scottish, visiting Colombia. The film feels as though it's through an outsider's point of view, which is interesting in a few ways, both in reference to the unbelievable ending to this film, which we'll get to, but also in reference to Jessica's name itself. Jessica Holland is her full name, which is the same name as Christine Gordon's character in Jacques Tourneur's 1943 film, I Walked with a Zombie. Although, interestingly, she's not the main character. That would be Betsy Collins, played by Frances D. And Betsy is a Canadian nurse that's been hired to head to the Caribbean island of Saint Sebastian to help cure Jessica of a bizarre condition that's left her in an unresponsive state. And when watching the film, one Joe has cited as a personal favorite, many of his themes and sensibilities can be noticed throughout. For one, in its splitting of halves, much of the first portion of the film is sequestered to the family's estate or to one area of the town. The second heads into the jungle, in the night, and towards the unknown, which of course sounds familiar. Also, the way that Christine Gordon's character awakes at night, entranced by the voodoo drums, nicely echoes Tilda being awoken by the sound, and her pursuit taking her through Colombia. So, now that we have a sense of Joe's work and some context for inspirations, we can dive in and take a look at some of the scenes in the film. So as we know, Jessica starts hearing a loud bang sound one night, and it makes her unable to sleep. This is the driving force of the film as she tries to understand why it's happening. We see Jessica visiting her sister Karen in the hospital with an unspecified ailment. Karen mentions dreaming of a hurt dog she was taking care of, but when she got sick, says she neglected the dog. She's in a hospital bed. She refers to being sick and having symptoms, but she said it's a dream, right? Yet she refers to real-world circumstances. So right off the bat, the film seems to be melding our ideas of consciousness. I also like this little scene later on. It's a lecture being given about acoustic guitars, and more specifically how the wood they're made out of is hygroscopic, meaning it's a material that absorbs water. Something about the fact that it's man-made, but also synergistic with the earth, and also ties into some of Joe's sensibilities with music and the auditory and how it brings people together. Much like in the next scene with Hernan, the audio engineer, who Jessica has tasked with trying to recreate the sound. Here we can sense the difference between the actual sound as it occurs in Jessica's head, the natural sound, and Hernan's attempts at a digital recreation of it, the technological sound. It feels easy to jump to comparisons like the ancient versus modern world, which nicely mirrors the two halves of this film in their respective locations. The first half is set in Bogota, the capital and most highly populated city in Colombia, and the second in the mountain jungles of Pijao, some 300 kilometers away. I also like this little moment where Jean Balibar's character Agnes invites Jessica into her workspace, and yet we're then shown shots of Jessica here in a library, reading knowledge passed on from both the past and the present. It's worth mentioning that Jessica is an orchid farmer, and she's reading books on botany, more specifically about diseased plants along with poisonous ones. The next scene shows Jessica strolling through an art gallery, and there's these really striking black and white paintings in the background. One of them in particular is brought to our attention, and once you've seen the ending, you'll definitely know why. It's kind of funny how direct Joe is being here. Later, as Jessica walks the streets, she notices she's being followed by a dog. She recoils from it in fear and keeps her distance until it leaves. And only now do we see the rest of the scene with Jessica and Agnes, showing how time can be elusive, which the film employs a few times. And Jessica is being shown the bones of a young girl. Here we see that she has a hole drilled in her head. Agnes mentions this could be due to a ritual, likely referring to trepanning, which was seen across cultures until around the 19th century. She also mentions that the girl was found during the construction of a tunnel. Near Pijao, in the real world, a massive tunnel is being built called La Línea, which bores through parts of the mountains, and when finished, will be the second largest tunnel in all of South America. Joe has cited inspiration from them using dynamite and drills to bore into the mountains, and I love the thematic connections being made between digging to uncover the mysteries of our past, and how Jessica digs into her own head in search of hidden answers. When Jessica later meets with her sister and her family for dinner, she again mentions the dog could be what's getting her sick, as if it were real. The sister's puzzled at first, but then agrees, and I'm like, wait, what? Jessica also misremembers in thinking a mutual friend of theirs is dead. Again, there seems to be a slippage of time or consciousness being hinted at. Karen's husband, played by the always amazing Daniel Jimenez Cacho, thinks that it's her work that's getting her sick. Karen mentions working with an organization that's investigating an uncontacted tribe called the Invisible People, going on to say how the elders will gather and unify their minds to create a spell to keep visitors away, and that may be what's getting her sick. She continues in sharing a story of a man who planned to excavate a road through the Amazon, and right when they mention this, the sound begins to kick in, and continues to throughout the story, almost as if it's voicing an opinion. She continues in saying majority of his crew decides to stop the excavation, and only he and one other individual continue on. They eventually go missing and are now presumed dead. Definitely feels like we're cooking here with ideas about deforestation and modernization, versus the old world and ancient rites. Notions of mankind's relationship to the earth continually permeate throughout the film. Earlier on, Jessica had met with Hernan, the audio technician again, showing her a song that he had made using the sound for what he calls his electronic punk band, and I'm still left wondering what the hell that would even sound like. As mentioned, Jessica is an orchid farmer, and she and Hernan are being shown refrigeration devices for flowers. The saleswoman states that it can add up to 30% more longevity of life. Referring to the technology, she says, "In here, time stops." This whole scene feels thematically of note, but we'll come back to it later. When Jessica goes to visit Hernan again at the studio, she finds not only is he not around, nobody there has ever heard of Hernan ever working there. Now, we're reaching the midpoint of the film, and I did want to talk about Joe's use of music. He's known to use music and dance to show unification in his work, and while he more commonly uses them as endings to his films, we're treated to a jazz quartet as an almost built-in interlude. Let's listen for a moment. kind of a banger, to be honest. But also, notice this smash cut right when the song ends. Being thrown into complete silence is striking, and this shot has a quiet power to it. And to me, this shot, along with those of the tunnel construction, have a mournful quality to them. Nobody shoots humans' invasion of nature quite like Joe does, and these shots of the tunnels begin to almost look otherworldly. We later see Jessica headed to Pijao, and Joe has referred to Pijao as Bogota's past. And Joe has mentioned that the political memory of Colombia was obvious, but as an outsider felt that he could not justify leaning in there too clearly. However, stating, there may be a political rumble beneath the surface, though. Later in the same interview, stating, the bang in this film can be from many sources, those natural disasters or man-made ones. The fireworks, gunshots, or explosions that are associated with national traumas. Which recalls an earlier scene. A bus tire pops loudly, and a man mistakes it for gunfire. He drops for cover before running away in fear. I like how writer Tony Raines put it when referring the scene, stating, the specter of FARC's violent insurrection against the elected government is never very far off screen. When Jessica does finally make it to Pijao, she eventually ends up by a stream where she meets another man named Hernan. He's credited as older Hernan, which is interesting, again tying in thoughts of duality and identity to the temporal. And I'm being reminded of other great films, who also splinter runtimes with identities, blurring dreamscapes and names beneath layers of ideas, or use forms of metafiction to reveal thematic purpose, and its character's otherness being central to its conceit. When we meet older Hernan, he sits by the stream descaling fish that he's caught, and eventually mentions to Jessica that he's never left his town, due to him being able to remember everything. He also mentions he won't watch film or television, stating there's already many stories. He picks up a rock and says there was once a man who was attacked by two workers and had his pendant and food stolen. He states it happened a long time ago, but that the vibration stayed within the rock. He goes on to say that the rocks, the trees, the cement, all remember everything, and that he too feels those same vibrations within himself, as if nature and the human spirit operate on the same frequency, and so can tap into some intangible connection that extends beyond our own earthly, limited grasp. He furthers this idea, mentioning how he remembers being in space before being born, spotting two lovers and thus creating his own birth. There's also this curious bit where Hernan says he doesn't dream. Jessica asks if he can show her, and he somehow passes out, but seems more like he just dies for a moment. Jessica says as much when asking what death was like. I just stopped, he responds. It's interesting to compare these scenes to the "time stops here" quote. How modern ingenuities can reject natural processes. Also how it ties the physical to the temporal as well. Time stops here versus Hernan's memory across all time. How his memory connects the history and the violence to the land it took place on. And the film repeatedly refers to what we choose to do with the materials mined from the earth. It's why we hear the lecture about the wood used in the guitars, or highlight the technology in the metals and glass to make the fridge units, or see the machines used to dig and excavate the earth itself. There's also something to the way the film compares sleeping to death, and dreaming with reality. The transient nature of consciousness and mysteries of dreamscapes are likened to the unknowability of death, and Jessica being led by her parasomnia reminds of this as well. We later see them in Hernan's favela. Jessica sits and begins to recall hiding under the bed with others, how they were searched for all night. She remembers her mother, but Hernan tells her that she's reading his memories. He says he's like a hard disk, Jessica like an antenna. She asks if the sound is his too. He says yes, but states it's from before their time. And I like how that's juxtaposed with the ultimate reveal of the film, and also how it may reference the sound mix, including the first ever recorded sound from the late 19th century. When they physically touch, we hear a mixture of human and natural sounds layered together, and it sounds as though we're drifting through different cultures and times as we hear varying languages, the creaking of metal ships, and waves crashing. I'm reminded by the soundscape and themes here to those of Kenneth Lonergan's Margaret, which also geniusly uses its sound mix to include the everyday struggles of nameless, ordinary people we never see.
That he has three sisters.
So I invited her along.
Two
I didn't think
oldest
it was going
ones
to
don't
sully our
speak.
whole relationship.
They haven't spoken to each other for 14 years.
When they stop physically touching, the sounds stop as well. And Jessica now seems to have a sense of clarity. When she heads to the window, we're finally given the answer. One of the most incredible rug pull endings I've ever seen, and challenges my ideas surrounding the film in some ways. But note how after he's had maybe the ultimate mic drop moment of all time, like literal galaxy brain ending from Joe to God, we don't end with the ship disappearing and it cuts to black. We're left behind here on the ground, and it's the sound of nature that carries us into the credits. Over the radio, they mention finding 2 sets of human remains in the tunnels, along with a dog, mentioning also they may have had holes drilled in their heads. This, of course, is referring to the earlier scene with Agnes. But how? And I don't think this is meant to be decoded or for a timeline to be pieced together. As I once put it to a friend, it's on some Synecdoche, New York shit. The themes emerging from this film's melding of time, identity, and history remind of Caden's epiphany, everyone is everyone. They're all the leads of their own stories, which can be compared to Hernan's There's Already Many Stories. Or again, Margaret's evocation of Sonder. Memoria also draws an interconnectedness of our human condition. Beyond being about our relationships to the Earth and to our past, it's also about our relationship with each other. That's why we see the jazz quartet playing in harmony, or hear the story of the invisible people unifying their minds. The film ascribes great value to history, art, music, anthropology, and nature. It's no coincidence that Jessica walks through all these spaces and absorbs the beauty and complexity of the world. In a way, we are all Jessica, and Joe has referred to her as the spirit of nothingness, a hole in the head to be emptied or filled. She's a sponge, she's a tabula rasa, or as Hernan put it, an antenna. And these ideas are furthered with the slippages of consciousness and memory, which in some ways suggests that there's multiple realities, multiple Jessicas. One where the dog isn't real, one where it's a stray, Jessica misremembering a death. Even the 2 bodies at the end could be meant to be Jessica and Agnes, since there's a dog. Which reminds of the countless possibilities in the branching paths of life, and the spiritual connection of our memories. It's as if the collective human spirit is woven into a fabric that stretches well before and well beyond our lifetimes. But our memories carry on, like reverberations echoing into infinity. Okay, so wait, if this is meant to be a story about Earth and our history, our relationship to each other, why is the ending depicting the literal exact opposite? Great question, I'm glad I asked. Outside of it being instantly memorable, it's an ending that's not quite a twist, but what I'd call a destabilizing ending. One that changes your sense of time or place or what kind of movie you're watching. Best example I can think of is from great Hungarian director Miklos Jancsó, whose film Electra My Love seems to be set in an archaic past, but ends with the 2 leads flying away in a helicopter. It's based on the Greek myth of Electra, and the ending serves to illustrate that the themes of a 2,000-year-old myth still resonate with present-day Hungary. So what thematic comparisons can we draw here? In a way, it's difficult to, right? And so I think in some way it echoes the mysteries regarding existence and death, the great unknown of the afterlife as compared to space. But deeper than that, it reminds again of the materials used. The precious metals that came crashing to Earth in meteors millions of years ago, over time, were mined, molded, and designed into ships and returned into the vastness of space. The same way our bodies are returned to the Earth, and our souls return to the universe. And Joe has talked about the ending a few times, once noting how Jessica is like radio waves dispersing in the air, the way that the ship disperses into the sky, which is interesting. But he illuminates further in another interview, saying, "To me, Jessica actually doesn't exist after the scene we were just discussing. She becomes slowly evaporated. You become a fictional character, and the idea of self, it just goes. Then we're talking about something larger, something that no longer fits one personality, but is about the shared time and the shared space of us. For me, the answer we get at the end of the film is just one possibility for the source of the sound. There are many other sound sources, and in events in different times in our history as well. It just happened to narrow here to the answer we got. But I hope that you feel it could be many other answers that she could have become caught to. So we've seen how the sound can represent various political traumas and ecological disasters across human history, how it's about the shared space of us, and Jessica being a conduit for the human spirit. Joe wants us to stop obsessing over ourselves, to turn outward, to learn and discover, to connect. We're all antenna, and the echoes of our world can always be heard. All we have to do is listen.
I'm the same as I was when I was 6 years old. And oh my God, I feel so damn old, but I'm really